Hey there, my friends. It's Andy coming to you from Yorba Linda, California for the Andy Falco Show. And I've received a fean comments, and this has happened a few times over the years, but you have people that argue with me because I say it's Americans or America versus the Democrat Party. And what sometimes they will say in a comment is that you stop calling us liberals or start calling Democrats progressives or stop aligning us with those people. That makes no sense because the Democratic Party is liberal, progressive, socialist, communist, all wrapped up into one. And it really has been for a very long time. So you can't separate them. They like to be the give the appearance of being sane and yet calling themselves a Democrat, and yet they continue to vote Democrat, continue to vote people like Gavin Newsom, Mamdani, AOC, Talib. We could go on. Just a number of people that will come to mind as I'm going through what I'm going to talk to you about today. But you can't separate yourselves. I don't know why it is you keep trying to do that, because you keep voting for the people that are socialists, Marxists, communists, Islamists throughout the United States. They all have a D next to their name when they're running. And so to comment on my posts to try to separate yourself from these people, I think is really crazy. So I'm going to go to my screen. I'm going to show you this woman that goes by DAC or DAC, I guess. She's New York's newest congresswoman. She's the founder of a leftist Islamic organization, a Democrat organization, that calls for the eradication of Western civilization. And she says, "We are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization." Then she goes on to some other nonsense down there that makes no sense. But this woman and others that just recently made it through the primary and will eventually get elected, and the only reason they're going to get elected is because who votes for them? Democrats. There's not, I doubt that there is even one Republican. There may be one goofball who thinks he's a Republican and votes Democrat, but the only way they get voted in is because Democrats vote for them. So you can't say that you need to be separated because you keep voting for these people simply because they're Democrat. Instead, you're not voting for America. That's what makes it America and Americans versus Democrats. Because the Democrats don't think that way. They don't see that this person's so crazy. So you got the Nazi out of Maine, who clearly is a Nazi and called himself a Nazi and knew the tattoo was a Nazi emblem. And then you just say, well, I know we were calling Trump a Nazi, but that's different. He really wasn't a Nazi. We just wanted you to believe he was a Nazi. But this guy who's really a Nazi, we all have to get behind him and vote for him. That's why you cannot be separated from all the other lunatics that are in your party, because you keep supporting them, giving them money. How do you give them money? You pay, as a teacher, you pay into the teachers' unions. You pay into a certain PAC. You pay into all these other things, or support USAID and don't want it, defunded, because really the USAID is funding the Democratic Party and has been for decades. That you want to now support it, and you scream when somebody wants to defund it or says, "Hey, wait a minute, this money's going to LGBT and transgender dances in some god-awful country, or teaching kids about pornography in schools and other countries." You say, we must have that. That's necessary. And you scream that, how can you defund USAID? Well, because USAID is a way that they funnel money or launder money into the Democratic Party. So continue to comment and say stupid things like the Democratic Party is not part of these other movements, because we know that it is. And you say, well, Gavin Newsom isn't that way. Are you crazy? Have you seen what he's done to the state of California? It had the economy of most countries, and he's literally destroyed it. I hate that word literally. I hesitated in saying it. But he has actually destroyed the economy in California. More people have moved out than moved in. You can't get a U-Haul because so many people are moving out of state that there's no U-Hauls available. And you continue to think that he's just a normal Democrat. He's not. He's a socialist, Marxist, essentially a communist that has good hair, apparently, and knows how to talk about, again, nonsense. He says things and will say things, but he doesn't often mean what he says and often doesn't do what he says. He says he's going to build this high-speed rail in California, which we don't need. And it's going to cost, I think, $30 billion in the beginning. It's now into the hundreds of billions of dollars, and yet nothing's actually happened. It hasn't been built. So where's that money gone? Where did all the money go? What about all the money that's involved in fraud in the state that he says that he's going to do something about, yet does nothing about? Yet the FBI has to come in and actually indicts and arrests and imprisons people who have committed fraud. And yet you, as a Democrat, say, how dare you stop the fraud in California? It's because you know the money from the fraud goes back into the Democratic Party. Let's see. I'm going to show you just one thing that he's doing recently. This is one of the newest things he's done. So this came to me in a screenshot from a real estate friend of mine, a realtor friend of mine. And I guess this came across California Red Alert Action Aristotle, which I guess is a real estate website or program. And it says, dramatic increase to transfer taxes. And this organization wants you to oppose it, but it's going to be too late because he's going to sign it in. And so the CAR, which is the organization, opposes AB 736. This is a bill that writes a transfer tax ceiling into state law for the first time at up to 3%. So an increase of 3%. It's actually more than 3%. It's a lot when you're talking about a lot of money in regard to how much the house costs. So sorry, back to reading this. Of a property sale price nearly 27 times higher than the 0.11% limit that currently applies to general law cities. A cap sets these high functions as a target, not a ceiling. In other words, it can go higher, giving cities across the state a new state-blessed number to climb toward. On a median-priced home of $930,260, the new ceiling would let a city charge a transfer tax of up to $27,907, nearly $28,000, compared to with no more than $1,023 under the current general law limit. The bill singles out homeowners for the worst treatment. Commercial and multifamily properties, regardless of value, would be protected by the cap. So this is your Democratic candidate, the person you say, well, he's not as crazy as he is. He's as bad as everyone else. He's no different than the people that they are voting for in New York, in Chicago, in Baltimore, in Illinois, all these other places. He is the same. And for you to comment, again, I'm just going to say this, that the normal Democrat doesn't like these things, it is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous statement that holds no ground. Now, really quickly, hopefully really quickly, I'm gonna go and through some things all the way back to the Civil War, because they also like to say, well, the Democrats back years ago were different and we're not the same. So let me just go back to the Civil War. And let's look at some key historical facts. This is from Grok. The Confederacy's primary goal was to maintain and expand the institution of slavery. Southern states seceded after Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 because they believed a Republican administration would restrict or eventually abolish slavery. The Confederate Constitution explicitly protected slavery and made it nearly impossible to abolish. So let's look at the party alignment. Democratic Party controlled the southern states. They controlled the southern states. Before and during the war, most Confederate leaders were Democrats. Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, former Democratic U.S. Senator. From Mississippi, Alexander Stephens, vice president of the Democracy, former Democratic congressman. Most Confederate cabinet members, generals, were prominent officers, and state governors were Democrats. Southern Democrats had long championed states' rights as a defense, so they call it states' rights. We just want states' rights. You recognize how they use these words? We just simply want states' rights. but as a defense of slavery, opposed to abolitionist movements, and supported pro-slavery policies such as a Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision. Let's see. The Civil War summary. The side that fought for slavery and against abolition, the Confederate States of America, was led and governed primarily by members of the Democratic Party in the South. All right. So that's kind of goes back to the early years. It's not the beginning of our country, but it's back during Abraham Lincoln's time, during the 1800s. So you're going to have many people that say, well, that was way back then and we're a lot different now. And I say, are you? So let's move to more recent times, the 1900s, and we will look at, let's see, the redlining and segregation. So redlining and segregation is, well, I'll explain them in just a little bit. So let's go to my screen. So Jim Crow segregation, legal racial segregation, primarily enforced by the Democratic Party in the southern states. And we're talking about the 1940s, somewhere around there. And so after the Reconstruction, post-1877, white Southern Democrats, often called Redeemers, regained control of the state legislature through violence, fraud, and intimidation. Come back to my camera. What do we see today from the Democratic Party? We see violence, fraud, and intimidation. What intimidation? Well, they call you racist. They called you misogynist. They call us Christian nationalists. They say "Make America Great Again" is white supremacy. And so through that intimidation, the other intimidation, of course, is the violence and assassinations. And then we see all kinds of fraud that's happening today. All right, back to my screen. So the Democrats, they passed and upheld Jim Crow laws. Democrats did, mandating racial segregation in public facilities, schools, transportation, and more. These were state and local Democratic governments. The National Democratic Party largely tolerated or accommodated Southern segregationists for electoral reasons until the mid-20th century. Okay, back to my camera. So tolerance, ignoring or appeasing or voting for these people is why this stuff all comes back. Do you see what was said there? It was kind of quiet for a little while, and then it came rushing back because they tolerated what would be the most extreme parts of their party because they wanted power. It didn't matter how crazy they were, but they voted for them because they themselves wanted power. As a Democrat, you could still be a Democrat, even though you didn't necessarily align with slavery, let's say, or segregation. But because they tolerated it, it comes screaming back. So this is history repeating itself if we look at what's happening today. So going back to my screen, in contrast, Republicans had led Reconstruction and passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but lost influence in the South by the late 1800s. Southern Democrats remained the dominant force behind legal segregation into the 1950s and 1960s, opposing Civil Rights Act of 1964. That was the Democrats. So redlining, let's just talk about so you understand what redlining is. It's probably been a long time since anybody taught you this in school. They don't teach this anymore because they don't want you to know that it was the Democratic Party. But redlining originated as a federal policy under the Democratic administration of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the New Deal. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, created in 1933, produced color-coded maps grading neighborhoods. Areas with black residents or deemed risky were marked red, high risk. That's redlining, denying federally backed loans. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, institutionalized this by refusing to insure mortgages in redlining areas and often requiring racial covenants, banning sales to non-whites. This is the Democrats. This was explicit federal government policy using race as a key factor in the underwriting manuals. It massively expanded residential segregation and the racial wealth gap by subsidizing white suburbs while locking black families out of home ownership. The practice was later adopted by the Veterans Administration and private banks. Redlining was not invented by private banks alone. It was standardized and scaled by federal democratic programs in the 1930s. Again, do you see what they're doing here? They are making it impossible for blacks communities to purchase homes in white communities. They're holding them back from being able to get loans, and they're trying to keep them in a place of need and separate them from the elite whites, elite white Democrats. Where do we not hear about that today? Do we not see that? Why do you see there are so many white people out there protesting for the rights of blacks? It's not because they care about the blacks. They just don't want them moving into their neighborhoods. They don't want them getting educated. They don't want them thinking for themselves. They want them stuck on government subsidies so that they can never make it to a place where they can occupy their space. That is why you see white women who are Democrats fighting me in social media for education for all the kids, no matter what color they are. They fight me on this because they do not want them educated. They want to hold them back. They want to stop the education of children of color because it's the way they've always been. It's the way Democrats have always thought. I just took you from the Civil War to the 1930s. So really quick, just to finish up on this point, important context and nuance, the Democratic Party at the time was a broad coalition. This is grok. They had to throw that in there. It included liberal Northerners and conservative Southern segregationists. FDR needed the Southern Democrat votes. So do you see again, he's doing it because he needed their votes and decided not to fight against it and supported it. And let's go down a little bit further. So I'm sorry, just come back to my camera. So that is in the 1930s. And so again, they'll say, okay, well, those were different Democrats at a different time. So you're not willing to accept that the Democrats are the same Democrats we have today in the Civil War. Okay, they are. To the 1930s. Well, they came back, but that's not us today. So let's go to the 1960s. So let's talk about what mayors and governors were in power in the states and cities where Martin Luther King was arrested or prosecuted. So Martin Luther King was arrested approximately 30 times during his civil rights movement. Most in southern states where the Democrats are, and cities for nonviolent protest activities such as parading without a permit, violating court junctions, or participating in demonstrations. So in this free country of the United States, they were arresting him for peaceful protesting, not for rioting, not for lighting police departments on fire like they did in Minnesota and across the United States, not for throwing rocks at the ICE agents. No, he was actually peacefully protesting, but yet Democrats, governors and mayors and chiefs of police arrested him for peacefully protesting and holding up signs and saying, can't we all just get along? And that he had a dream that there would not be any segregation that the Democrats had created. So he was fighting against the Democrats. So why do you think, I'm going to give you the top 5 of the 30 times he was arrested. So Martin Luther King was arrested 30 times by Democrats. The first one that's of significance is in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956. He was arrested for speeding. Charged for driving 30 miles per hour in a 25 mile an hour. Now, I was a police officer. I don't believe I ever arrested anybody for driving 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, unless there were children present. Governor of Alabama was James E. Big Jim Folsom. He's a Democrat. And the mayor of Montgomery, where he was arrested, was W.A. Gale, a Democrat, 1951, 1959. Albany, Georgia, he was arrested for obstructing the sidewalk and parading without a permit. A prayer vigil. Look at that right there. A prayer vigil that he was having on the sidewalk. A Democratic governor and mayor wanted him arrested. Samuel Ernest Van de Veer, Democrat. Mayor of Albany, a Democrat. Let's go to Birmingham, Alabama. On Good Friday, nonetheless, with Ralph Abernathy for demonstrating without a permit and violating a court junction. This led to the famous letter from Birmingham jail. Who was the governor of Alabama? George Wallace. We've heard that name several times, Democrat. Mayor of Birmingham, Albert Boutwell, Democrat. Let's see, the Public Safety Commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor, a staunch segregist. So you were wondering why I included chiefs of police, because you got this public, which is essentially the police chief of police, a staunch segregationist, wanted blacks separated from whites, a Democrat, played the most direct role in ordering arrest and using police dogs and fire hoses. So as a Democrat, back to my camera, when you see these videos of police dogs being used on black people who were not necessarily protesting, they were simply parading, they were having prayer vigils, they were saying, hey, we're just as smart as you white Democrats, why do you hate us so much? And what Eugene Bull Connor did is he called out the police dogs. He's a Democrat, he's a segregationist, and he is the one. When you see these videos, and Democrats will show them as if they're Republicans, it was the Democrats who used the police dogs against the black protesters or peacefully protesting protesters. They're the ones. The Democrats were using police dogs against black people. The mayor, the governor, the chief of police using police dogs. All right, back to my screen. We'll go to Selma, Alabama, the voting rights campaign. During voting, riots and demonstrations, MLK was arrested by George Wallace, a Democrat, and Joseph Smitherman, a Democrat. And then we'll just go to the fifth one here, Atlanta, Georgia. And you can go with all 30 and you can do this all day long. He was sitting down. So he was a sit-in. So Martin Luther King is simply sitting at Rich's department store lunch counter. He sat at a counter at Rich's department store. They're calling it a sit-in. He was just sitting there. And the governor of Atlanta, Georgia, who was Samuel Ernest Vanderveer, again, was a Democrat. And you had the mayor, Hartsfield, who was a Democrat, long serving as mayor from 37 to 62, a segregationist, had Martin Luther King arrested for sitting at a lunch counter. Now let's see, who was the city mayor and the governor when he got killed? So Martin Luther King was assassinated by gunshot on the balcony of Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, while supporting striking black sanitation workers. So he's supporting black sanitation workers, suggesting that they should get paid the same as Democrat white workers. The governor of Tennessee at the time was Buford Ellington, a Democrat. The mayor was Henry Loeb, a Democrat. And let's look at quick context. Martin Luther King traveled to Memphis to support the Memphis sanitation workers strike. The workers were protesting unsafe conditions, low pay, and racial discrimination. Mayor Henry Loeb was strongly resistant to the strike's demands and refused to recognize their union. Buford Ellington was in office, a Democrat, during these tense periods following the assassination, which triggered riots in Memphis, Tennessee. And it just continued. The local and state leaders, Democrats, reflecting the Democratic Party's dominance in the Southern politics during the era. So this has been going on for years. This is the 1960s. Okay, so so that was then. The Civil War, the 1930s, the late 1950s, early 1960s. Those were different people. It's still going on today. You got the Poverty Law Center, the SPLC. The SPLC, as we know, was an organization that the Democrats wanted to tell you was defending blacks' rights. But they didn't have anything to defend, so they had to create animosity in a sense where they needed white supremacists. Again, in some of this stuff, you'll see that the Democrats were white supremacists. They were strong supporters of white supremacy. You got, what's his name, Strom, who they wanted to elect president. He wanted police protection for KKK and white supremacists. They wanted him president, and they nominated him during the Democratic convention. I think it was 1938, I believe. So they wanted this guy to be president, he wanted police protection and support for the KKK. So here we come to today, the SPLC. We learn that over the years, they have been supporting all the so-called white supremacy organizations, whether it's the KKK or white supremacy organizations of different names, and paying the leadership to stay in power. Some of them wanted to quit. They said, no, you can't quit. You're doing a great job. We need to pay you. They were paying for crosses and the lighter fluid and those things to make sure that they had the supplies to be able to light crosses and to have protests and parades and parties that were against black people. That's the only way the SPLC could raise money. They ended up raising a ton of money after the protests where they tried to claim that President Trump said that there were fine people on both sides. And then he said, except for the white supremacists and those people that were horrible people. And he said, I don't like those people. I don't support them. But there were fine people that were there, and they could have done this peacefully. And so when that happened, then they raised tons of money. And so do you see the pattern here? You have the Democratic Party who needs strife. They need people rioting. They need them lighting police departments on fire. They need BLM. They need black people to be killed because as long as the black people are dying, they can then say it's Republicans' fault. But you see here, throughout the decades of the United States, the Democratic Party has been behind every strife, every racial protest, and every racial divide. There is the word I was looking for. Every racial divide that we've had in this country. They have created it. They have wanted it. They still want it today. And it's happening even more so today, where they're bringing in now Islamists, they're bringing in LGBTQ, they're bringing in Marxists and communists, and these are all people that are great at creating a divide between America and Americans and the Democratic parties and those people that support them. They've convinced the black people that they're here to rescue them when they don't even see, many of them, there's a lot that do now, and see that it's the Democratic Party who's created the problems in their communities. In the schools across the United States, the public schools in the United States, in Baltimore and New York and Los Angeles, where they have a large black community, what schools do the worst? Yet we spend the most money on. The most tax dollars goes to these schools, and yet you have the worst results. You have illiteracy. They can't do math. They don't know how to read a book. They don't know how to process and critically think because they're never taught to do so. They lower the standards so they don't have to show up to school. They lower the standards so they don't have to do homework. And of course, kids are going to say, wow, I don't have to do homework and I can graduate. A lot of kids would say, that's fantastic. But when you do it to a certain group of people, which is the black community in the Democrats' world, you can create all kinds of things out of that. When children can't read and they grow up as adults and they can't read, they tend to turn to crime more than anything else. And so you have a high illiteracy in prisons. A lot of the prisoners who have been incarcerated cannot read. So it's a symptom of what it is that has caused them to get to the point where, you know what, I can't get a job anywhere. I can't be an engineer. I can't even make it in the military. And so what else do I have to do but to turn to crime? And that's what ends up happening. They want to destroy Western civilization and the nuclear family because what also happens in the black community is that they have fatherlessness. And without a father, many men grow up without a moral compass and an understanding of what it means to work hard and to treat their wives well and to raise their kids well, because they don't have the example of a parent who's done that. They only have the example of a parent who has not done that. And so if I don't have a dad, then I can have kids and I don't need to be there for them because my dad wasn't there for me. But this all goes back to the Democrat Party. I don't care if you call them liberals, progressives, socialists, Marxists, communists. It's all the same. All this Democratic Party, this big tent that they like to call it. When they say big tent, they mean that they want everybody inside who is horrible, who is a miserable human being, who want the government to be in charge of everything. They want them to take control of the means of production, which means they control everything. And you have what ends up in Venezuela. Venezuela is a socialist, formerly socialist country that now, with this recent earthquake, fell apart with that earthquake. Why? because the government was in charge of the buildings, the government was in charge of the roads, the government was in charge of the infrastructure, which all fell apart because they took control of the means of production that built the roads, the asphalt that was made, the rebar, everything that's involved in it was in control of the government of Venezuela, which now they're seeing what happens when the government's in charge of everything. It falls apart like a house of cards. You just blow the wind and it all falls apart. Here in the United States, because we have capitalism and we have people that work hard and want to make money and employ people, which creates more taxes availability. When you have working people, you have things that don't fall apart. That there's an earthquake and we go, wow, that was a big earthquake. And yet everything's standing. You have a few glasses that fall off a shelf. You have a few pictures that fall off the wall, but you got these huge buildings. They don't fall down. Why? Because they weren't built by the government. They were built by capitalists, and things get done. Here in California, when you have a socialist involved, you have a train that costs billions of dollars that never gets built. That's what happens in socialism. In New York, during the wintertime, when it snowed, you had streets that didn't get plowed. Why? Because the government was in charge of it. So you can go ahead and comment and tell me that the Democratic Party is not liberal, progressive, communist, Islamist. Which one did I miss? Marxist. There's all the isms and ists that you are. That's the Democratic Party. You can't separate yourself. You never have. At least since the time of what I told you, between the Civil War and now, you're still the same people. You have to create separate. You live on separating the minorities and the majorities. You create strife in the cities. You create issues that will cause people to riot. You encourage the rioting. You put people into the media, which also encourages the rioting, and do false reporting on things to lie about what somebody is or isn't, or who's doing what and who's doing something else. You scream and yell about a few $1 million that's used to clean the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., but say nothing about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being defrauded from you, the taxpayer, in Minnesota, in California, in Illinois. You say nothing about that. It's 100 times to 1,000 times more fraudulent of what they're doing, but yet when you see money being used and something actually happen, then you go and you try to destroy it. When President Trump wants to build the ballroom using his money and the money of his friends, you have a cow. He's not even using your tax money to do that. And you every news story from the liberal media is saying how horrible it is, and it's the end of democracy. But it's not the end of democracy when we're being defrauded in all these states and they're using your money to do what? You're not getting it. You love it when they defraud, but you're not getting any of it. It's going into the Democratic Party coffers to get them elected. To do what? To do nothing for you. To hold you back. To not educate your kids. So stop telling me that you are separating yourself from these other lunatics. You can't. You've elected them. You say nothing when they're running. You say, oh, okay, well, he's a little crazy, but that's okay. We'll just vote for him because we just want power. But when you want power, you also want destruction, because the Democratic Party has been involved in nothing but the destruction of this country. They are not for this country. They never have been. And as far as it stands right now, they never will be. So it's America and Americans versus the Democrat Party at this point. It is getting bad, and it's going to get worse. But you need to wake up. All right, my friends, that's it. Talk to you later. Take care. Bye.